You are listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I'm your host, Alan Peterson, and you're listening to episode number 69. In this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be interviewing Ellison Cooper, who has a very fascinating background. She has a Ph.D. in anthropology from UCLA with a background in archaeology, cultural neuroscience, ancient religion, colonialism, and human rights. She has conducted fieldwork in Central America, West Africa, Micronesia, and Western Europe. And she's also worked as a murder investigator in Washington, D.C., and is a certified canine search and rescue federal disaster worker. She now is living in the Bay Area in Northern California with her husband and son. And her debut novel, Caged, has recently been published by Minotaur Books, which is an imprint of Macmillan. Caged has been receiving some pretty incredible reviews. One of the 25 best thriller books of the summer by the New York Post. The Library Journal said it was pathologically twisted, and one of the best summer reads for 2018 by Publishers Weekly. And it's been hailed by a lot of some pretty big-name authors, like Chelsea Kane, Lisa Gardner, called it dark and mesmerizing. So it's a fascinating book. It's about an FBI neuroscientist, Sayre Altair, who hunts for evil in the deep recesses of the human mind. Highly recommend you check out her new book. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking to her about her work, her background, and about how she came up with the character of Sayre Altair, and her writing process, and a whole lot more. So stay tuned for my interview with Ellison Cooper. Hey everybody, this is Alan with Meet the Thriller Author. I have Ellison Cooper on Skype. How are you doing, Ellison?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing very good. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit about your background? You have one of the most interesting backgrounds I've seen.
So I actually have a PhD in anthropology. And so that's my academic background. And my focus there was on primarily Maya archaeology, but I also conducted a lot of work around the world in places like Micronesia and West Africa. And then one of my other areas of expertise is in cultural neuroscience and ancient religion.
Yeah, that was so fascinating when I was looking up at your book, which is Caged, mm-hmm. and the character there is an FBI neuroscientist.
Yes. And
so I'm not too familiar with that. Can you tell us just a little bit about that? And does the FBI really have neuroscientists on staff?
No, they don't have anyone who's specifically a neuroscientist as far as I know, although I have spoken to a number of analysts at the FBI. I didn't actually get to find out if there's anybody new. So certainly not in the last, say, 8 months, as far as I know. But there is the FBI's National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime, and they have a lot of academics on staff. And so they do a lot of really interesting research into, violent crime, obviously. And so because of my background in cultural neurobiology, I got interested, and my love of crime fiction, I sort of got interested in the potential crossover there between those two fields. And I thought, well, this would be a perfect FBI research project, looking into the brains of serial killers.
So can you tell us a little bit about the story of Caged and the FBI agent? Is it Sayre Altair?
Yeah, Sayre Altair. So she's, as you said, an FBI neuroscientist. In Caged, her research is basically looking at the brains of serial killers and what kinds of differences their brains might have to quote-unquote normal brains. And it turns out there's a huge body of research actually out there already about this. And it turns out that serial killers do, in fact, have deficiencies in parts of especially their prefrontal cortex, and their amygdala, which is a gland that's in the in the limbic system. So it's a really interesting. It was fascinating to me to find out that there are these really clear biological markers of the sort of traits of serial killers: lack of empathy, impulsivity. So that's what Sayre is studying in Caged, and so her research is a central part of the resolution of the book. I don't want to ruin anything. But so she's actually focused on her research when she gets called away after Washington, D.C. police find a girl that's been starved to death in a cage. And so Sayre is called in to lead that investigation, and things sort of escalate from there.
And is Cage, is that your debut novel, or have you?
It is.
Oh, it
Yeah.
is. Wow.
Yeah, my debut.
Oh, that's a great start. Congrats.
Thank you. Yes. None of this feels particularly real at this moment in my life.
And is this a standalone, or are you planning to develop it into a series?
No, it's definitely a series. I got a 3-book deal.
Ooh.
So the second book we just officially settled on Buried as the title. So Buried will be out next summer. And then the third book, which I'm just starting on right now, will be out the summer after that. And then hopefully I'll keep going. I could write about these characters forever.
So you say you're getting started on your next book. Like, how much research and, I mean, what's your process for getting a story before you start actually writing the story?
Well, so I'm just starting my third book. I think I'm still learning my process a little bit, but I did a great deal of research for Cage specifically. So Cage draws on a lot of my background. So there's, some anthropology and ancient religion stuff in there. I'm actually a canine wilderness search and rescue volunteer, so there's some dog stuff in there. And then the neurobiology is where I did most of my research, because even though I have a cultural neurobiology background, I didn't know that much about the neurology of violence. So I did maybe 6 months of research where I really read all the academic work being done there and sort of got my feet under me with that research. And then for the second book, well, I can't really tell you what I did all the research about because it'll give something away. But there is a canine search and rescue dog in Buried, and that's all from my own sort of background. And then I'm starting on book 3, which is, let me think what I can say without being too... Well, right now I'm doing a deep dive into Egyptian mythology, especially sort of funerary rites and that kind of thing. So I'll probably do another 3 or 4 months of research before I really start writing.
What's the writing process? Do you outline everything and then you start to write, or do you just kind of, once you're done with the research, you just dive into it?
I am obsessed with whiteboards. I now have a room in my house that I've taken over that I think there's probably 15 whiteboards, huge whiteboards. And I outline. I usually fill a whiteboard or 2 with an outline that I use to basically highlight the sort of, key turning points. And then I also have a whiteboard that's character arcs and a whiteboard for the timeline. So I do a lot of whiteboarding, but then once I start writing, that all goes out the window. And I usually end up with a very different book than I originally outlined. But for some reason, I've started thinking of my outlines as bumpers, and I just sort of careen wildly in the middle of those. So the main pieces stay the same, but the events and the actual sequence all completely change as I start writing.
Yeah, well, that's interesting with the whiteboards, though. I like that. I like that idea. That way, it's right there in your, you just glance up and it's right there, versus having to dig through notebooks or a computer file or something.
I'm a very visual person, so it's really helpful for me to be able to actually, draw arrows between events and connect things. I use different color pens, so it helps me really get a sense of the sort of pacing and that kind of thing.
I said you have a very a fascinating background, done a lot of different things. Did you always want to write a novel, or is that something that's always been in the back of your mind, or did it come later?
I've always loved the idea, and in graduate school, I sort of messed around and wrote, but I would write maybe a few thousand words and then peter out. So it was always something I liked the idea of, but I was pretty focused on my academic career. I was a tenure-track professor and was working on my research. But then actually when my son, who was an infant at the time, got quite ill, I ended up having to quit my professor job. So I found myself spending a lot of time in doctor's office waiting rooms and that kind of thing. And so really writing, I dredged up that old interest just to keep myself from going down some very dark roads mentally. And so I channeled a lot of that into my books. So that's what I really started writing seriously. And that was about 7 years ago. So it took me a long time to learn how to write a novel. I started one and it was really not very good. Turns out there's a pretty steep learning curve going from academic writing to fiction. And I actually went and looked back at one of my first, I started submitting short stories just to work on my craft. And I think it was probably the first short story I submitted to a magazine for publication. I actually had academic citations in the short story, which is kind of ridiculous now looking back on it. But yeah, so it took me many years of just practicing and many wonderful short story editors getting back to me and telling me what I was doing well and what I was doing wrong. That was sort of the process.
And now, do you like write every day, or is it do you just write when you have an actual project going?
I do write. Well, I always have a project going. I'm a type A person, so I'm always working. I have to be working on something. So yeah, I'm always writing. And now that I've gotten this 3-book deal, I've been able to really sort of focus on that more rather than just feeling like it's a hobby. So I pretty much do write every day.
And do you usually write in the same spot, or you like mix it up and go to different places, or you have like dedicated office?
No, wherever I can get writing done. Okay. So I do have a room at my house, but my son, who's 9 now, can always find me. So I usually, when he's in class or something, then I can go to a coffee shop or just a few minutes here and there when I'm at home. So yeah, I'm not one of those people that has to have everything perfect in the same exact spot. I'm pretty flexible.
With your background, cultural neuroscience, I know a lot of your educational background goes into your character, but what about, like, is a lot of you in Sayre Altair?
I would love to say no. I don't know if that's true or if that's just a complete lie. I definitely, she is, I would say Sayre is actually really built on a lot of the sort of amazing women I know from different walks of life. So, I mean, she's definitely not based on me directly in any way. There are definitely some personality traits that might be similar to me. She likes beer and has a totally messy apartment, which is pretty accurate to my life. But no, really, most of her characteristics are sort of an amalgam of other sort of, I don't know, traits of amazing women. I just wanted to write this sort of kick-ass woman that I admire.
And are the events in your books like are they kind of like that Law and Order, like ripped from the headlines, or?
No. So let's see. I don't want to give anything away because one of the big twists is a science thing. But I actually had the idea, the sort of kernel of the actual mystery came from reading an old science article, a forensics article that was about 10 years ago. And I was surprised that scientific fact about DNA hadn't ever shown up in a real life case. And still, to my knowledge, it hasn't. Although we wouldn't really know. If whoever used this fact of DNA got away with it, then we would never know if it had actually been used. So, but no, there's no actual crime, as far as I know, that has used the science in Caged.
Yeah, that's what when I was looking at Caged. I mean, I think with your background, you could really go into stories that really that are different from what's out there.
I hope
pretty
so.
Cool. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, that's really what I wanted to do. I jokingly tell the story, but it's true. When I was trying to figure out what I'd written one very bad, not very well done book, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to work on next. And I knew I wanted to start another novel, but I just couldn't quite settle on a topic. And I was looking for something to read, and I was actually talking to my husband, and I said, well, I just wish somebody would write a book or a crime thriller that combined my 3 favorite things: dogs, neuroscience, and archaeology. And then it was like a lightning bolt struck. I was like, what? That's the book I should be writing. I try to bring all those different pieces into the stories.
Yeah, that's what the advice you always read in the how to write books is read with the book that you, what is it? Write the book that you want to read.
Such a cliche. It's really, I mean, it is the most cliched writing advice, but it turned out to work for me. Because I mean, To be honest, like I said, I'd written one previous novel, and it was sort of like pulling teeth. It just never felt, I don't know, I hate to say magical, but it just never felt, I just never had any feeling there. But writing Cage was fun. Like it was just enjoyable. The whole process was fun. I was excited to get to the computer every day. It just felt very different. So that was a good lesson for me to learn.
Before you started writing, were you a fan of crime fiction novels?
Yes, I read a lot of different, I mean, I'm pretty happy to read across genres, but I would say that 90 to 95% of what I read is crime fiction, crime thrillers, or just thrillers. I like all kinds of thrillers.
And do you still find time to read, or are you too busy now with all your writing and everything?
Yeah, sadly, I haven't been reading as much as I like. I used to read a couple books a week, and now I'm probably down to maybe one or two a month. So it's not completely been cut off, but it's definitely less, sadly.
Yeah, especially if it's all that research that you have to do, unless you're doing a lot of reading there, and it's kind of hard.
Exactly.
And I see that I was looking at your bio on Amazon, and you have a great blurb there from Lisa Garner, comparing you to Thomas Harris is one of my favorites, and Kathy Rex. I haven't read her books yet though, so I'm gonna have to check her out. But
yeah, I love her stuff.
But that's a pretty cool comparison.
Well, I might have actually, and I don't cry very often, but I might have actually teared up when I read that, because I don't think she could have said anything more complimentary.
Yeah.
I literally couldn't have come up with something better than that.
And from Lisa Garner too.
I know. She's literally, I mean, I think she's definitely in my top 5 writers, if not the top. So yes, I was blown away when I saw that quote from her.
Still, are you available? Like, you have a website, and are you active like on Facebook and social media, or for readers to find you?
Yeah, so my website's ellisoncooper.com, and all my social media links are there. So I'm on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and semi-active.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I'll have a link on the website for the listeners. But yeah, that's cool. They can go check you out on your website and be able to find you. Before I let you go, some of our listeners are aspiring writers. Any advice that you could give to them? Put you on the spot.
Well, so my advice is trust your gut. Don't listen to anybody else's advice. So read all the books, look at all the writing advice, pay attention, and then do what you want. Find your own process, trust yourself. Have faith in your vision and what you really want to be talking about and what you want to write about. That would be my main advice.
All right, that's great. Well, thank you so much, Ellison, for joining us. I really appreciate you taking time to talk to us about your books.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Meet the Thriller Author. I'd like to ask you to please review and rate this podcast over on iTunes. It really helps me get the word out. If you take a few seconds of your time to do that, it would be much appreciated. You can also visit my website at thrillingreads.com/podcast for show notes on this episode, as well as information about the podcast in general. And you can also sign up for my mailing list there. You'll be getting special offers from our guests, as well as information, behind the scenes information on the podcast. And please do visit my author website at alanpeterson.com. I appreciate your support. And so until next episode, I will talk to you then.